Cole Bennett, your time is over.
After everything I've given this place.
That morning, the moment my world tilted, I was still holding the old ceramic coffee mug my late wife gave me 15 years ago. I hadn't even taken a sip when the words hit me sharp, cold, and embarrassingly public. Cole Bennett, you're terminated. Biosynthex needs a new generation. Those were the first sounds I heard after stepping into the conference room. No greeting, no glance, no chance to sit. Just the sentence cut clean like a scalpel, delivered by Miles Reddington, our 33-year-old CEO whose handshake still smelled like fresh business school ink. For a second, I truly believed he had mistaken me for someone else. I'd spent 3 years building the report still tucked under my arm. 3 years of experiments, failures, breakthroughs, all dismissed with one breath. If moments like this hit close to home. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? And if you want to follow the rest of this story, feel free to subscribe so we can keep bringing new chapters your way. The room didn't move. No one spoke. A few young analysts blinked at me the way people do when they realize they're watching the final episode of a show they didn't mean to get attached to. Their eyes followed me with that strange mixture of pity and curiosity, like I was the last relic being wheeled out of a museum before renovations. I tried to swallow the dryness in my throat as I forced my feet to back away from the table. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Shock has a way of stealing words before you even know you need them. All I could think was, I can't believe they actually did it. After everything, they really did this. As I reached the doorway, the room behind me erupted in the soft shuffle of people pretending to refocus on their laptops. That's when I heard it. Miles's voice, low but unmistakably proud. Leaning toward his assistant, fire him in front of everyone. He whispered, it creates authority. Authority. So that was the point, not a decision, a performance. I stood there for a moment, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic of the mug. The humiliation washed over me, first fast and stinging, followed by a quieter, deeper disbelief. They had planned it, practiced it, executed it. I turned away, swallowing what was left of my pride, still trying to understand the part that hurt most, not that they fired me, but that they thought I wouldn't fight back. I carried the cardboard box against my chest like it was evidence of a crime, not 25 years of my life. The walk down the main hallway of Biosynthex Labs had never felt longer, or quieter. Every step echoed off the polished floors, reminding me I was no longer part of the rhythm I had helped build. I kept my eyes forward, but the weight of the silence was impossible to ignore. It clung to me, heavy and cold, the way shame always does. People noticed. They pretended not to, but they noticed. Shoulders tightened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few monitors dimmed as someone minimized a window they suddenly didn't want me to see. I'd walked this hall 1,000 times, celebrating breakthroughs, fighting deadlines, carrying failures, but never like this. Never as the man they quietly escorted out. About halfway down, I caught the reflection of 2 interns in the glass. They whispered without turning their heads, trying to be discreet. One of them murmured, "That's him. He's the one who saved the Enzyme 47 trial." The words stung more than they comforted. I didn't want legacy. I wanted dignity. I wanted at least one person to ask if I was all right, or if the rumors were true, or if after everything I had done, this was really how my story ended. But the hall stayed silent, except for the faint hum of lab ventilation and the sound of my own breathing. The bitterness rose slowly, quiet, steady, burning. I forced it back down. Pride can wound a man twice, once when it's taken, and once when he lets it show. So I straightened my shoulders, tightened my grip on the box, and kept walking, even as every pair of eyes reminded me I was a relic being carried out with the old equipment. When I reached the elevator alcove, the doors stood open like they were waiting for the final verdict. I stepped inside, set the box at my feet, and pressed the lobby button. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the faint chime of the doors closing behind me. The humiliation settled deeper, as if the building itself had exhaled in relief now that I was gone. Then my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. I assumed it was another automated exit notice or some HR message pretending to be compassionate, but the name on the screen froze me. Dr. Lena Aldridge, co-founder, mentor, the sharpest mind Biosynthex ever had. Her message was short, urgent, and nothing like the hollow sympathy I expected. I heard, "Come to my house immediately. Biosynthex is rotting from the inside." The elevator descended, but my pulse climbed. For the first time that morning, the humiliation didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't supposed to walk away from. Lena's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where nothing dramatic was ever supposed to happen. Yet the moment she opened the door and pulled me inside without a greeting, I felt the air shift. Something heavy lived in that living room, something she had been holding for too long. She didn't waste time. She didn't even offer me tea, which for Lena was a sign of urgency bordering on panic. "Cole," she said, closing the curtains as if the walls had ears, "you deserve to know what they've been doing with your work." My stomach tightened. I had come here expecting comfort or maybe a sympathetic explanation. Instead, her tone carried the weight of a confession. She led me to her old study, the one lined with stacks of journals and framed patents from Biosynthex's early days. She pulled a folder from a drawer and placed it on the desk in front of me. Inside were contracts, international agreements, licensing deals, partnerships with labs I had only dreamed of collaborating with. Every one of them carried the same signature pattern. Miles's signature, the company's seal. No mention of the researcher whose data made those deals possible. "My data," Lena spoke quietly, but each word landed like a blow. "They used your original enzyme platform to negotiate these contracts. They routed the credit through a shell research team so your name wouldn't appear anywhere." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The years of missed holidays, late-night experiments, the sacrifices that had hollowed out entire chapters of my life, they hadn't just taken them for granted. They had weaponized them. I sank into the chair, the shock expanding inside me until my chest hurt. "So that's why Miles wanted me gone, to cover the trail." Lena said, "He knows the audits are tightening. If anyone traced the original sequences, they'd find your signature all over them. The betrayal hit me harder than the firing. Being dismissed was humiliating. Learning I had been erased long before, that was something else entirely, a wound carved deeper, older, and intentional." Then Lena stood, walked to the corner of the room, and knelt beside a small floor safe. I watched her dial the combination with steady hands. When the door clicked open, she pulled out a thin metal box and set it between us. "These," she said, lifting the lid, "are the research equity certificates tied to your original enzyme platform. Biosynthex just sold this block of shares during their restructuring." I stared at the documents, confused, sold to who her eyes met mine, sharp and unflinching, to whoever had the legal right of first refusal, and according to the old charter, "That's you." The room went still. Shock collided with clarity. After years of being overlooked, undercut, and used, the truth finally cut through the fog. I hadn't just been pushed out. I had been pushed out because I still had power they never intended me to discover. The papers lay on the edge of Lena's desk, crisp and formal, carrying the weight of a future I had never imagined for myself. My hand hovered above them for a moment, trembling with a mixture of fury and strange relief. After everything Biosynthex had taken from me, my time, my energy, the pieces of my life I could never reclaim, these documents were the first thing that felt like a step toward reclaiming something. I lowered the pen, exhaling slowly as if steadying myself before surgery, and prepared to sign away the last illusion that the company had ever valued me. As the pen touched the page, memories surged without warning, sharp and vivid, pulling me backward through the years. I saw myself in the cold fluorescence of Lab 4, working through the night while alarms blinked across equipment. My wife had been in the hospital then. I should have been at her side, holding her hand, telling her I loved her while she still heard me. Instead, I spent those hours bent over an unstable enzyme model, convinced that saving the project would justify the sacrifice. She passed before sunrise. I never got to say goodbye. Even now, the thought lodged in my chest like a stone. Another memory followed, quieter but equally merciless. I recalled missing my son's graduation because Biosynthex faced a financial collapse. I had been the one who stayed, the one who volunteered to sleep on the office couch, the one who kept the research division afloat when everyone else panicked. The company survived because I gave pieces of my life to it, and now, after decades of service, they tossed me aside with the same care someone gives to a broken beaker. The humiliation still stung, but beneath it, something harder, older, and more determined had begun to rise. My hand shook again, but this time the tremor felt different, less from pain, more from the clarity finally taking shape. I finished signing the last page and set the pen down. The silence in the room felt almost ceremonial. Lena watched me with the expression of someone who understood the cost of every stroke of ink. I straightened, inhaled, and for the first time since my firing, felt something close to resolve unfurl inside me. Whatever came next would not catch me unprepared. A soft chime broke the stillness. My phone screen lit up with a system notification I nearly ignored until I read the headline. Biosynthex had scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday. Rumor attached Miles planned to remove several department heads, including the ones who had worked beside me for years. People who had stood with me through everything. People he now saw as obstacles. I stared at the message, heat rising beneath my ribs. Signing those papers hadn't been an ending. It was the beginning of a fight I should have started a long time ago. Walking back into my office felt like stepping into a museum built out of the pieces of a life I barely recognized anymore. HR had emailed me a checklist that morning: return access card, collect personal items, sign release forms, but none of that prepared me for the silence waiting behind the glass door. It was the same room I had spent more hours in than my own home, yet now it felt foreign, hollowed out, as if my absence had already been written into its walls. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle before forcing myself forward. I set the empty box on the desk and began gathering my things. The first item I picked up was a framed photo of my family from years ago, my wife smiling in the sun. My son wearing a crooked graduation cap he insisted on wearing early. I'd promised him I would be there for the real ceremony. I missed it anyway. A lab crisis had erupted that week, and I convinced myself the company needed me more than my teenage son did. I told him I would make it up to him. I never really did. Beside the photo lay a faded birthday card with his 8-year-old handwriting on the front. He had drawn a cartoon version of me holding a beaker, proudly labeling it Dad the Scientist. I remembered that day vividly. I worked a double shift and didn't get home until nearly midnight. He had fallen asleep at the kitchen table waiting for me. The card beside his plate. I picked it up now with careful fingers, feeling the same dull ache spread across my chest. Every object in that room carried a story like that, quiet sacrifices nobody at Biosynthex ever saw or cared to acknowledge. Then I noticed the beige jacket hanging on the back of my chair. My wife's jacket. She used to bring it when she visited me late at night, insisting I step outside for fresh air, even if only for 5 minutes. She said I lived too much inside fluorescent lights. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to take it home. Leaving it there felt like keeping a part of her close. Now, seeing it again in this context felt like another small break inside me. I sat down slowly, steadying myself before opening the bottom drawer to clear the rest of my things. That was when I saw it, a small black USB drive tucked beneath a stack of old notes, the one I had given Miles last year during the enzyme trials. Curious. I plugged it into my laptop. A series of data files appeared instantly, including the original safety logs I had compiled and the modified versions Miles later submitted. The differences were stark. He hadn't just rushed the process, he had altered safety thresholds, bypassed mandatory testing windows, and manipulated results to shorten the approval timeline. It wasn't a technical oversight, it was deliberate fraud. I stared at the screen as a cold realization settled over me. Amid the ruins of everything I had lost, I was holding something powerful, something Biosynthex could not bury. My pain wasn't the only thing they had left behind. They had left me proof. I didn't plan on hearing anything more about Biosynthex that week, but news has a way of finding you when pride is wounded, and the wound is still fresh. The morning after I cleared out my office, a former colleague sent me a message that read, "Only, you might want to listen to this." A link followed. I hesitated, then pressed play. Miles's voice burst through my phone speakers like static soaked in arrogance. Removing coal was the first step to cleaning Biosynthex of outdated parts, he announced proudly, as if firing me were equivalent to curing a disease. I could almost picture him at the head of the conference table expensive suit. Smug smirk, chin lifted just enough to hide the insecurity underneath. He always tried to stand like a visionary, but he never had the posture of someone who built anything. Only the posture of someone who inherited it. The recording continued, and the bitterness in his tone made me laugh under my breath. It wasn't humor. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you finally see someone's true nature laid bare. "We don't need relics slowing us down," he boasted. "Biosynthex is entering a new age, and I'm leading it." Steve Jobs had his detractors too. Steve Jobs! Of course he said that. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. It took a special kind of delusion to compare yourself to a legend while you were busy tripping over your own ego. Miles couldn't lead a research team through a 5-minute fire drill, let alone a revolution, and anyone who had ever worked with him knew it, but the recording wasn't done. Another voice in the room, probably one of the junior executives eager to impress, asked how he managed to secure the company's latest contract so quickly. Miles didn't hesitate. "That part was easy," he said, lowering his voice as if preparing to share a trade secret. "Cole did most of the early work years ago. I just polished it up and presented it. 8 years of taking credit, and nobody questioned a thing." Long silence filled my apartment. Not anger, not shock, something colder. For 8 years. He hadn't just used my research, he had built his entire reputation on it. Those late nights, the breakthroughs I fought for, the setbacks I carried alone. He had paraded them around as his own, and there he was, bragging about it like a child proud of stealing candy from a blind man. I replayed the clip once more, letting every word settle. The sting of humiliation I'd felt in the conference room shifted into something sharper. Not rage clarity. The kind that tells you this isn't just personal anymore. This is a fire that needs fuel. And Miles had just handed me plenty. I learned a long time ago that anger burns fast, but strategy burns steady. So the morning after hearing Miles brag about stealing my work, I didn't lash out or send furious emails. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and quietly drafted a report addressed to the National Bioethics Review Council. No signature, no identifying details. Just facts, clinical, precise, and impossible to ignore. When I hit submit, the act felt less like revenge and more like adjusting a microscope, bringing the truth into focus. By the next afternoon, the consequences arrived exactly as I expected. Biosynthex received an emergency notice demanding a full audit of all enzyme-related research from the last 5 years. Compliance officers were scheduled to arrive within 48 hours, the kind of audit no executive could talk their way out of, especially not one who had been building his career on manipulated data. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues, each one more frantic than the last. "They're pulling every file." One wrote, "Miles is losing it." Another said, "I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I simply watched events unfold from a distance, letting the pressure settle exactly where it belonged." Later that evening, another message arrived, this time from a senior technician who had always kept her head down. Her words were simple. "You should hear what he's doing now." Attached was a short audio clip. I pressed play. Miles's voice spilled through the speaker, sharp and panicked. "Delete the logs," he barked. "Scrub the raw data. I don't care how, just get it done." The fear beneath his arrogance was unmistakable. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. I felt a cold, measured calm settle over me. Of all the things Miles could have tried, tampering with the logs was the most predictable and the most pathetic. I leaned back in my chair, remembering the night I wrote the logging system for Enzyme 47's platform. Back then, Biosynthex was still struggling, and I built the system to survive failures, crashes, and even internal sabotage. Every action, every alteration, every upload was automatically duplicated to a remote backup server deep inside our data architecture. And there was something Miles never understood. You can't erase what was designed not to disappear. Within an hour, another message reached me from the same technician. The backups appeared. She wrote, "The auditors already have copies." I imagined the look on Miles's face when he realized he had walked straight into a trap I didn't even set for him intentionally, a safeguard from years ago becoming the snare tightening around his career. I closed my laptop slowly, absorbing the quiet satisfaction spreading through me. This wasn't anger. It wasn't even triumph. It was control steady, precise, and long overdue. The first thread had been pulled, and the entire fabric was beginning to unravel exactly as it should. Friday arrived with the kind of heavy stillness that precedes a storm. I wasn't in the Biosynthex building, at least. Not yet. Instead, I stood across the street inside a quiet cafe, watching the company's glass tower reflect the early morning light. Today was the board meeting, the one Miles had been preparing for with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled every variable. He didn't know that one variable had already slipped out of his hands. At 9 o'clock sharp, the boardroom lights flickered on. I imagined each director settling into the long, polished table, flipping through agendas, glancing at their tablets, and at the far end of that room, the leather chair labeled Major Shareholder sat empty. A silence would have followed, brief, but tense enough to stretch. There hadn't been a majority shareholder for years. Until now. Until me. But they didn't know that yet. I crossed my arms, watching the windows from a distance. I could almost feel the air inside that room tighten as Miles began the meeting. He was probably wearing his favorite navy suit, hair styled into that artificial confidence he mistook for leadership. He likely stood at the head of the table, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The audit had rattled him, but not enough to kill his arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he would have said, projecting authority he no longer possessed, "our new major shareholder is fully aligned with my vision. Their absence today is a sign of confidence, not concern." I could picture the board reacting, polite nods, uneasy glances, the silent exchange of questions no one dared ask. Who was the investor? Why hadn't they been introduced? And why keep a seat empty if they weren't going to show? The tension in the cafe pressed against my chest like a physical weight, even from blocks away. I sipped my coffee and waited. I knew what came next, inside the boardroom. The secretary knocked softly before entering. A thick folder clutched to her chest. She whispered something to Miles as she handed it over, her eyes flicking toward the empty chair. He would have waved her off dismissively until he read the document. The shareholder registry update, filed that morning. I imagined the way his expression froze, the blood draining from his face as he reached the final page, the directors leaning forward instinctively, trying to decipher the change in him, and then the moment when the truth left his lips, or worse, when he stayed silent and simply turned the papers around. My name, printed clearly. Cole Bennett, 37% voting power. A shift would have rippled across the room like a breath held too long finally released. Chairs creaked, pens stilled. Every gaze moved from Miles to the empty chair at the end of the table. And that was the moment they understood. Someone else held the power now. And he was on his way. The moment I stepped through the boardroom doors, the room fell silent in a way I had never heard before. Not the awkward silence of a failed presentation or the heavy quiet after bad news, but the sharp, electric stillness that comes when people realize the story they thought they were watching has just changed direction. I walked in slowly, the worn beige jacket of my late wife draped over my arm. It always felt like a shield, soft, personal, grounding. Today, it felt like armor. Miles froze mid-sentence. His eyes widened just enough to betray the panic he fought to hide. He had expected a ghost to stay dead. Instead, here I was, standing under the bright lights with a calmness that cut sharper than anger. I didn't say a word as I approached the long table. I simply moved to the chair labeled Major Shareholder, pulled it out, and sat down with deliberate composure. A few directors shifted in their seats, unsure whether to look at me or at Miles. I could feel their uncertainty pressing against the air, but I didn't mind. Today wasn't about easing their discomfort. I placed the USB drive on the table, the small plastic casing suddenly louder than any accusation. "I have something to play for the board," I said, my voice steady. My fingers didn't shake as I connected it to the projection console. The screen blinked alive, filling the room with the familiar interface of our internal log system. Then, I pressed play. Miles's voice spilled across the speakers, instantly arrogant, careless, self-incriminating. The altered safety data, the rushed timelines, the commands to delete logs, the bragging about stealing my work. Every word he thought would stay hidden echoed back at him, amplified for everyone to hear. A few directors exchanged glances. Others stared directly at him, their expressions hardening by the second. Miles lurched forward, sputtering. "This is taken out of context. These files are manipulated. He's lying." "No," I replied quietly. "These logs are mine, and the backup system is tamper-proof. Every action you took was recorded. Every change you made was preserved." His face drained of color for a heartbeat. The room was motionless. Then a chair scraped the floor. One of the senior directors, the one who had never spoken much in meetings, the one who had watched everything from behind thoughtful eyes, stood up. He looked directly at me, not at Miles, and said clearly, "I cast my vote with Mr. Bennett. I've seen him save this company 3 times. I will not stand with someone who nearly destroyed it. The impact landed like a hammer. A second director rose, then a third, then another, a domino of truth, toppling the lies that had held this place hostage by the time the last director stood. Miles no longer looked like a CEO. He looked like a man finally facing the justice he thought he could outrun. When the final vote was cast, the boardroom fell into a silence so thick it seemed to hold the walls in place. Miles didn't say a word. He simply sat there, stiff and pale. As the chairwoman read the decision aloud, effective immediately. He was suspended pending a full investigation by the National Bioethics Review Council. No one looked at him, almost as if acknowledging him would somehow prolong the moment. And just like that, the man who had mocked me, used me, and built his reputation on my work was escorted out of the room without applause, protest, or pity, only the heavy quiet of consequences finally earned when the doors closed behind him. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me, not with fear, not with awe, just a steady expectation. The seat at the head of the table was no longer empty. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the company's future settle across my shoulders, but also something lighter, the certainty that I didn't need revenge to feel whole again. We rebuild, I said simply. And we did, though, not the way Miles would have imagined. I didn't purge departments or punish the people who once stayed silent. Instead, I began appointing the young scientists Miles had ignored or intimidated, the analyst who had slipped me the recording, the technician who safeguarded the logs, the interns who asked questions he never bothered to answer. Watching them step into new roles brought a quiet satisfaction, the kind that grows from investing in people rather than controlling them. Later that afternoon, after hours of meetings and signatures, I stood alone in the boardroom. My wife's old jacket still rested on the back of my chair. I placed her framed photo on the polished table, letting my fingers linger on the edge of the glass. I kept my promise. I murmured, "We're finally building something that won't destroy the people who give their lives to it." Just then, my phone buzzed. A new message from the National Bioethics Review Council appeared on screen. I opened it, expecting another procedural update, but instead, it announced I would be awarded the National Medal of Honor for my contributions to biological safety and ethical research. I exhaled slowly, feeling a calm pride settle deep in my chest. Victory hadn't arrived with thunder. It had arrived with truth, integrity, and the quiet rise of something better than revenge. And if this story resonates with you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from today. Your comments, likes, shares, and subscriptions help me and our team continue bringing stories like this to life. Let's keep going, together.